Okay, so get this. We're looking into a DNA scientist accused of tampering with evidence. Not just like a few cases, we could be talking hundreds. You sent me a ton of articles on this, Yvonne Woods.
Missy Woods, yeah.
Missy Woods. She was a DNA scientist, worked for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation.
Right.
So basically what we're trying to do is figure out just how big this thing is. Yeah, like how much did this affect the justice system and how are they dealing with the fallout?
Right.
And trust me, there are some wild details in here. Like, she was considered a top analyst.
Oh, really?
They called her a star analyst. But then at the same time, there are people saying she wasn't very thorough. Yeah, and all this has already led to some plea deals in murder cases.
See, that's what's crazy to me, is how one tiny detail can unravel a huge story like this. We're not talking about just a couple of incidents here. This potentially affects over 500 cases. Yeah, and it's everything. Homicides, sexual assaults, robberies. It really makes you question whether the justice system can get things right.
And the fact that this is about DNA evidence is even more unsettling, right? Most people see that as like the gold standard.
Absolutely. DNA evidence has really transformed how we do things in the courts, but this case shows that it's not foolproof. The process of how the evidence is collected, analyzed, all of it, it has to be done right.
Yeah, which brings us to Yvonne Woods. She was this DNA scientist at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, had a great reputation, but now she's facing some really serious charges.
Really serious. 52 counts of forgery, 48 of trying to influence a public servant, and then there's perjury and cybercrime charges too. And all this is alleged to have happened between 2008 and 2023. I can't even fathom how something like that could go on for so long.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
When you say attempting to influence a public servant, what exactly does that mean in this context? Like, how does that relate to what she's accused of doing with the DNA evidence?
Basically, they're saying that by manipulating the evidence, she was trying to influence the outcomes of trials, which would mean influencing judges and juries who are public servants.
Okay.
It's a very serious charge, and it shows just how big of an impact her actions might have had.
So how was all of this uncovered? Was there a whistleblower?
You know, it's actually kind of simple. Back in 2023, an intern was going through a case that Woods worked on in 2018 and noticed some information was missing. That one little detail set off this huge investigation, which then uncovered a pattern of misconduct that goes back over a decade.
So what exactly was she doing? How was she tampering with the evidence?
Well, she's accused of changing data to hide the fact that she'd tampered with it, deleting data that showed problems with her testing, and not keeping proper records of her work.
So she was basically trying to make the evidence fit a narrative.
That's the idea. Scientific evidence should be objective. It shouldn't be manipulated to get a specific outcome.
Of course.
When you can't trust the evidence, the whole legal process falls apart.
And we're already seeing real-world consequences. You mentioned plea deals. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, there are at least 2 murder cases where concerns about Woods' work resulted in lighter sentences. One is the case of Michael Channel Jefferson, who was convicted of a murder that happened back in 1985.
Right, so it was a cold case. They used DNA to finally solve it.
Yes, and Jefferson was identified as the suspect, but he took a plea deal instead of going to trial.
Because of the doubts about Woods and her work.
Exactly. The prosecution was worried that if they took it to trial, the defense would challenge any evidence that involved Woods, and Jefferson might be acquitted.
That makes sense.
So the plea deal, where Jefferson pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, was seen as the safest way to at least get some accountability.
So instead of potentially life in prison for murder, he got 32 years for conspiracy.
Exactly. A huge difference.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you want justice for the victim. On the other, you have to make sure the evidence you're using is solid.
For sure, and that's a difficult position for the prosecutors to be in. They have to decide. Is it better to get a conviction, even for a lesser charge, when there are doubts about the evidence? Or should they risk going to trial and potentially having the accused walk free, even if they might be guilty?
And I can't imagine how frustrating it is for everyone involved. What about the victim's family? Did they have any say in the plea deal?
Well, the victim's daughter, Tamardine Harney, she attended Woods' court hearings. She's been very vocal about the need for accountability.
And rightly so. This is a reminder that these cases are about real people whose lives were completely changed by Woods' actions.
And it raises the question, how could this go on for so long? Were there any warning signs about her work?
That's what I was thinking. Was she just that good at hiding it? Or were there signs that people missed?
Well, an internal affairs report shows that there were concerns about her work as early as 2014. Yeah, a coworker expressed concerns about her methods, and she was even temporarily removed from DNA cases in 2018 because of accusations that she was manipulating data.
So they knew about it, but she was still working on cases. That doesn't seem right.
It does raise questions about the oversight at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. How could someone with a history of questionable practices continue working on such important cases for so long?
So it sounds like this isn't just about one person's actions.
Right. It points to potential systemic problems within the forensic lab itself. And the Colorado Bureau of Investigation knows that. They've hired an independent firm, Forward Resolutions LLC, to review their whole forensic program.
Is that enough, though?
Well, it's a necessary step. This situation has really damaged public trust in the justice system, and they need to figure out how to address that.
It sounds expensive.
Yeah.
Retesting all that DNA, reviewing all those cases.
It is. It's already cost over $11 million, and the Colorado Department of Public Safety is asking for another $7.5 million from the legislature. That money will go toward an independent lab to retest the DNA and to give resources to district attorneys to review cases that might be affected.
So basically, they're trying to ensure that something like this can't happen again.
Exactly. They're trying to restore public trust in the justice system.
And that trust has definitely taken a hit. I mean, if a star analyst like Woods could do this for over a decade, it makes you wonder how reliable forensic science really is.
It's a legitimate concern. Authorities haven't found any wrongful convictions directly because of Woods' actions yet, but it's a possibility. This case has definitely exposed weaknesses in the system, and they need greater transparency, stricter rules, and a real culture of accountability.
So this isn't just a Colorado problem, then. This is something all forensic labs need to be paying attention to.
Absolutely. This has implications for forensic science everywhere.
Well, we've covered a lot, but there's still more to unpack. Let's take a closer look at some of the specific cases that were affected by Woods' alleged misconduct.
Okay, let's start with Michael Channel Jefferson.
The 1985 cold case where he ended up taking a plea deal instead of going to trial because of the questions surrounding the DNA evidence.
Yeah, let's delve into that one. So they offered Jefferson this deal.
Okay.
Plead guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and they wouldn't put him on trial for the murder itself.
So he avoids a trial.
Yeah, but he maintains his innocence, and this deal meant a 32-year sentence. Without the deal, he could have gotten a much longer sentence, maybe even life.
And this was all because of the concerns surrounding Yvonne Woods.
Exactly. Prosecutors were worried that any evidence linked to her would be challenged and Jefferson might walk free. They saw the plea deal, while not perfect, as a way to ensure at least some level of accountability.
It's a tough choice.
Yeah.
You want to see justice for the victim, but you also need to be sure the evidence is solid. That must be a lot of pressure on the prosecutors.
No doubt. And it raises these ethical questions like, is it better to get a conviction even for a lesser charge if there are doubts about the evidence? Or should they risk a trial and maybe see the accused go free, even though they might be guilty? Tough calls.
And then there's the emotional toll this takes on everyone. What about the victim's family? How did they feel about the plea deal?
Well, Tamara Dean Harney, the daughter of Roger Dean, the man who was murdered in 1985, she's been pretty outspoken. She attended Woods' court hearings, talked about the need for someone to be held accountable.
Yeah, it's got to be so frustrating for her to see the case end this way, with so many questions still unanswered. Absolutely.
It really drives home the point that these cases aren't just abstract legal battles. They involve real people, real lives that have been changed forever. Woods' alleged actions, they reach far beyond the courtroom.
Absolutely. Which brings us to another case. The Garrett Coughlin case. Can you refresh my memory on that one?
Sure. Coughlin was accused of a triple homicide back in 2017. He was actually convicted, but that was overturned. Juror misconduct, so they had to do a retrial.
Okay, so that's where Woods comes in.
Yes, in the retrial, the prosecution was relying a lot on circumstantial evidence. Woods was going to be a key witness because of the DNA analysis she did, but with everything surrounding her work, they didn't want to put her on the stand.
Because her testimony might not hold up, and then Coughlin could be acquitted.
Exactly. So they offered Coughlin a deal. Plead guilty to second-degree murder, avoid the trial.
Instead of facing a life sentence.
Right. So both Jefferson and Coughlin's cases show how these concerns about Woods' work really pushed the prosecution to make these deals that drastically changed the outcomes.
And it brings up a bigger issue, too. It's not just about the plea deals. It's about how this erodes people's trust in the whole system. When people start to question scientific evidence, it weakens the foundation of our justice system. So how do we prevent this from happening again?
Well, this case has definitely made people call for more oversight of forensic labs.
More oversight.
Yeah, standardized procedures, mandatory accreditation, better quality control.
So raising the bar, making sure everyone is following the same rule.
Exactly. Making sure the evidence presented in court is actually reliable.
But even with stricter rules, how do you account for the human element? How do you stop someone who's determined to, cheat the system?
Yeah, it's tricky. Part of the problem is forensic science operates in this gray area sometimes. There's a lot of interpretation involved, so it's not always clear what's an honest mistake and what's intentional misconduct. It's complicated.
So what's the solution? Better training, better technology, or both?
All of that's important, but it also comes down to creating a culture of transparency and accountability in these labs. Analysts need to be able to speak up if they see something wrong, report errors, raise concerns, without being afraid of getting in trouble for it.
Which, it sounds like, was not the case in Woods' lab, right? We talked about how there were concerns about her work going way back, but she kept working.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. It suggests there was a reluctance to acknowledge or address problems, maybe a fear of bad publicity, or having to admit that mistakes were made.
So we need accountability on multiple levels, not just for individuals, but for the system as a whole.
Right, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation bringing in that independent firm, Forward Resolutions, to review their program, that's a step in the right direction. But to really change things, it's going to take a much bigger effort involving not just the labs, but law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, even the judges.
So everyone involved in the justice system needs to be part of the solution.
Exactly. It's about making sure justice is served fairly and that people can trust the system. This case has shown how fragile that trust is and how important it is to protect it.
It's definitely been a wake-up call. One person's actions having this ripple effect, impacting so many lives, shaking our legal system to its core.
And it reminds us that we can't take anything for granted. We need to be vigilant, think critically, and challenge assumptions. We can't be complacent when it comes to justice.
Well said. So, we've discussed the immediate impact, but what about the long-term consequences? How might this change the future of forensic science and the justice system as a whole? So thinking about the long term, and we've talked about how this has impacted specific cases and how it's really shaken people's trust in forensic science as a whole.
Yeah.
What are the bigger long-term changes that could come from all of this?
Well, you're definitely going to see more and more people calling for stricter oversight of these labs nationwide.
Stricter oversight, you mean like more regulations?
Yeah, things like standardized procedures for everyone, mandatory accreditation, stronger quality control measures, that kind of thing.
So basically making sure everyone's playing by the same rules and that the rules are tough enough to actually prevent misconduct. But, rules are only as good as the people following them, right? How do you stop someone who's really intent on gaming the system?
That's the tough part. A big part of the problem is that forensic science often deals with a lot of subjective interpretation. It's not always a clear-cut yes or no.
Right, there's a lot of nuance.
Exactly. So sometimes it can be hard to tell if something is a genuine mistake or if someone is intentionally trying to do something wrong.
So it sounds like it's not just about having stricter rules in place. You need a culture shift as well.
Exactly. You need to create a culture where transparency and accountability are valued, where analysts feel like they can speak up if they see something that seems off, report errors, raise concerns, without being afraid of getting in trouble.
Which, it doesn't sound like that was the case at all with Woods and her lab. We know there were concerns about her going back years. She was allowed to keep working.
Right, and that sends a really bad message. It suggests that maybe there was a hesitation to address these problems, maybe because of the potential for bad PR or having to admit that there were mistakes made.
So it's not just about holding individuals accountable then. It's about making sure the system itself is set up in a way that these kinds of things are less likely to happen in the first place.
Exactly. And the Colorado Bureau of Investigation bringing in that independent firm, Forward Resolutions, to take a look at their whole program, that's definitely a move in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a start.
But for real change to happen, it can't stop there. It needs to go beyond just one lab. It has to involve law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, even the judges. Everyone needs to be part of the solution.
So basically, a complete overhaul of how the justice system handles forensic evidence.
In a way, yes. The goal is to ensure that justice is served fairly and that people can trust the system to get it right. This case has shown how easily that trust can be broken.
Yeah, it's definitely been a wake-up call. We've seen how one person's actions can create this ripple effect, impacting all these lives and shaking the foundation of our legal system.
It makes you realize that we can't afford to be complacent. We need to stay vigilant, question everything, and hold people in power accountable.
Well said. This deep dive has been incredibly informative, to say the least. It's clear that there are a lot of changes that need to be made to ensure that forensic science is being used ethically and responsibly.
It's a stark reminder that even with all the scientific advancements we have, it still comes down to human judgment, integrity, and a commitment to finding the truth.
It's given us all a lot to think about. This case reminds us that the pursuit of justice is a constant process, one that requires us to be watchful, to think critically, and to be willing to challenge the way things are done. And it's a conversation that needs to continue, not just within the legal system, but within our society as a whole.